a body of doctrinal divinity, or a system of practical truths deduced from the sacred scriptures by Dr. John Gill, D.D., prepared by David Clark for students at Beerton Particular Baptist College, Pakistan. There are 7 books treating the subject of a body of doctrinal divinity. This vlog is the first book that has 31 chapters and treats chapter 1 of God, His Word, names, nature, perfections and persons. Chapter 1 of the being of God. Having undertaken to write a system of theology or a body of doctrinal divinity, and theology being nothing else than a speaking of God, or a discoursing concerning Him, His nature, names, perfections, and persons, His purposes, providences, ways, works, and word, I shall begin with the being of God, and the proof and evidence of it, which is the foundation of all religion. For if there is no God, religion is a vain thing, and it matters not what we believe, nor what we do, since there is no superior being to whom we are accountable for either faith or practice. Some, because of the being of God is a first principle which is not to be disputed, and because that there is one is a self-evident proposition, not to be disproved, have thought it should not be admitted as a matter of debate. But since such is the malice of Satan, as to suggest the contrary to the minds of men, and such the badness of some wicked men as to listen to it and imbibe it, and such the weakness of some good men to be distressed and harassed, to be harassed and distressed with doubts about it at times, it cannot be improper to endeavour to fortify our minds with reasons and arguments against such suggestions and insinuations. And 1. My first argument, to prove the being of God, shall be taken from the general consent of men of all nations, in all ages of the world, among whom belief of it has universally obtained, which is not reasonable to suppose would have been obtained if it was not true. This has been observed by many heathen writers themselves. Aristotle says, all men have a persuasion of deity, or that there is a God. Cicero observed, there is no nation so wild and savage whose minds are not imbibed with the opinion of the gods. Many entertain wrong notions of them, but all suppose and own the divine power and nature. And in another place he says, there is no animal besides man that has any knowledge of God, and of men there is no nation so untractable and fierce, although it may be ignorant what a God it should have, yet it is not ignorant that one should be had. And again, it is the sense of all mankind that it is innate in all, and as it were engraven on the mind, that there is a God. But what a one he is, in that they vary, but that he is, none denies. And to the same sense are the words of Seneca. There never was a nation so desolate and abandoned, so lawless and immoral, as to believe there is no God. So Elinus relates, none of barbarous nations ever fell into atheism, or doubted of the gods, whether they were or not, or whether they took care of human affairs or not. Not the Indians, not the Gauls, nor the Egyptians. And Plutarch has these remarkable words, if you go over the earth, he says, you may find cities without walls, letters, kings, houses, wealth, money, devoid of theatres and schools, but a city without temples and gods, and where there is no use of prayers, oaths, and oracles, or sacrifice to obtain good or avert evil, no man ever saw. These things were observed and said when the true knowledge of God was in a great measure lost, and idolatry prevailed, and yet even then this was the general sense of mankind. In the first ages of the world, men universally believed in the true God and worshipped him, as Adam and his sons and their posterity, until the flood. Nor does there appear any trace of idolatry there, nor for some time after. The sins which caused that and with which the world was filled seemed to be lewdness and uncleanness, rapine and violence. Some think the Tower of Babel was built for an idolatrous use, and it may be that about that time idolatry was set up. It is thought to have prevailed in the days of Serug, and it is very probable that when the greater part of the posterity of Adam's sons were dispersed throughout the earth and settled in the distant parts of it, that they were remote from those among whom the true worship of God was preserved. They, by degrees, lost sight of the true God and forsook his worship. And this being the case, they began to worship the sun in his stead, and which led on to the worship of the moon and the host of heaven, which seemed to be the first objects of idolatry. This was as early as the times of Job, who plainly refers to it, Job 31, 26 and 27. And indeed, when men had cast off the true object of worship, what more natural to substitute in his room than the sun, the moon and the stars, which were above them, visible to them and so glorious in themselves and so beneficial to the earth and men on it. Hence the people of Israel were exhorted to take care that their eyes were not ensnared at the sight of them, to fall down to worship them, and which in latter times they did. Deuteronomy 4:19, 2 Kings 21:3. It appears also that men took very early to the deification of their heroes after death, their kings and great personages, either for their wisdom and knowledge, or for their courage and valour, and martial exploits, and other things. Such were the Bel, or Belus, of the Babylonians, or Baal-Peor of the Moabites, and the Molech of the Phoenicians, and other Baalim lords, or kings mentioned in the Scripture. And such were Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Hercules, and the rest of the rabble of the heathen deities. And indeed, their lairs and penates, or household gods, were no other than the images of their deceased parents, or more remote ancestors, whose memory they revered, and in process of time their deities became very numerous. They had gods many and lords many, even with the Jews, when fallen into idolatry. Their gods were according to the number of their cities, Jeremiah 2:28. And as for the Gentiles, they worshipped almost everything, not only the sun, the moon, the stars, but the earth, fire, water, various sorts of animals, of oxen, goats, swine, cats, dogs, and fish of the rivers, the river horse and the crocodile, those amphibious creatures, the fowls of the air, as the hawk, the stork, the ibis, and even insects and fly, yea, creeping things, as serpents, the beetle, and also vegetables, onions and garlic, which occasioned the satirical poets to say, O sanctus genitus, quibus hucec nascuntur in Horatius animae, O holy nations, whose gods are born in their gardens. Nay, some have worshipped the devil himself, as both in the East and the West Indies, and that for this reason, that he might not harm them. Now, though all these betray the dreadful depravity of human nature, the wretched ignorance of mankind, and the sad stupidity men were sunken into, yet, at the same time, such shocking idolatry, in all the branches of it, it is full proof of the truth and force of my argument that all men in all ages and countries have been possessed with the notion of a God, since rather than have no God, they have chosen false ones. So deeply rooted is a sense of deity in the minds of men.